You mentioned things about the FBI and the casting some doubt on the competence of the FBI. This is a really important part of the story, because what you write about is the online sleuths who helped catch the January 6th rioters. And the title of your book, and when I first got it in the mail, I was really struck by it. I kind of did a little little take here. The Sedition Hunters, How January 6th Broke the Justice System. Okay, so let's talk about that title, because a lot of people are going to go, well, hold it, but the justice system is working now. We are having, one after another have been arrested. They have been convicted. You have a lot of people who've gone to jail. The justice system seems to actually be working. So that's not what you meant, though. How did January 6th break the justice system? Let's start there.
Yeah. I think that there are a lot of wins, right? And I wouldn't take that away from especially the seditious conspiracy cases. These are major victories, I think, for the justice system. You had the longest sentence, for example, 22 years. It was handed out to a member of the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers case, very significant prison sentences there. But frankly, it's just the capacity of the justice system. There are going to be people, frankly, who are going to walk away from this, who have committed violent crimes on January 6th, who are never going to be charged. Whether or not they're identified is a different story. But we're already at the halfway mark of this investigation, because the statute of limitations is 5 years. And the total spectrum of people who could be charged in connection with the Capitol attack, and that means they either entered the building or assaulted law enforcement officers outside or committed some sort of property damage outside. Inside that limited realm, which is sort of where the FBI has drawn the boundaries, that is upwards of 3,000 people. And today we have only 1,100. I say only, that's a lot of people, but 1,100 people who have been charged. And there are just hundreds of cases. In fact, more than 1,000 cases that are identified right now that you could walk in and write up an affidavit against somebody tomorrow. Most of those are identified, are people who are identified directly by the sleuths. And sent into the FBI. So there are just all of these cases sitting out there, and the speed of these cases has really slowed down. And there are just people, who are not going to ever be charged, and who could be charged. And I think that's really it's sort of the capacity for this, and that also sort of reflects how the system was broken before January 6th, because the fact that January 6th happened is sort of shows how the intelligence community, or the intelligence part of this justice system, was broken, because you just had these bureaucratic hurdles that were in the way of them actually preventing January 6th from taking place.
And I think that's what's really, really valuable about your book. That my takeaway was that if it had been just left up to the justice system, to the FBI, to the intelligence services, we wouldn't have really broken this case, would we? I mean, you tell the story that all of this footage from the cell phones on Twitter, along with the police officer body cams, the surveillance cameras from the attack, energized this, which you write the book about, this online group of self-appointed detectives who set out to find the identities of all of the rioters. And, as you write in this book, this Internet Neighborhood Watch became an invaluable resource to the FBI. I mean, this was, I won't say it's the first one, but it was certainly the most dramatic crowdsourced investigation. This whole thing would not have played out that way if you hadn't had people sitting in their basement like you and I right now, on their computers, doing the work that the professionals either didn't know how to do or just didn't have the resources to do. So tell me a little bit about this online neighborhood watch that broke so many of these cases.
It's funny, with the basement idea. It's one of the reasons I think a lot of the sleuths were really sort of eager to talk to me. Was part of it to just sort of dispel this idea that, they're sort of these losers in their mom's basement, right? I think like a lot of these people, I talked about one of these guys, really successful guy, voted for Trump twice, right? And it plays a critical role in this online community. And I think that's really, technological skills that people develop are really valuable. And a lot of these people have really, rewarding family lives, rewarding careers, but have gotten really into this,
really good at it.
Really good at this. And it is fascinating. Those things.
So who are they? Give me a profile. I mean, how many people are we talking about, and who are they? I mean, they're not the 500-pound guy sitting in his mom's basement. Okay, I get that.
That's right.
But they obviously were very, very skilled and were able to do a lot of things that are pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, so very early on, there were actually some people from overseas who were really good at open source intelligence that were involved in sort of documenting a lot of this. And but there's a ton of people basically who, it's a really diverse group, frankly. So I'll start with like one woman who, just considered herself, just so you know, a mom. That was her sort of full-time job. She's from Pennsylvania. She lives near Hershey, and she just sort of got a message early on. From a Sedition Hunters group. And she sort of just went to town on Facebook trying to identify this guy who was actually found inside the U.S. Senate on January 6th. And this one wasn't the biggest mystery in the world because he was wearing actually the sweatshirt that belonged to his children's school. And it was a pretty small school. So she worked backwards off of that, went to the Facebook page for the school and basically just started looking at anyone who had ever liked or commented on any post from the school. Eventually found somebody. It was under the name of Zeker Bozell. Clicked on that. And it was just like a snowman, but then it was a profile photo, but went even deeper on it. Then ended up figuring out that it was this individual called Brent Bozell IV, who was actually, of course, the son of Brent Bozell the third, and sort of, inherited a lot of this conservative movement back for the past more than century. So that was, an individual who was identified. He's smashing in a window there when they first made entry to the Capitol. So it's been really fascinating to see how this has all come together. But then, there are also people who just really have used their technological skills. On the other end, there's one, dad who, from the South, works for a major company, pretty successful. And he really just sort of has been really about archiving as much of this footage as he possibly can. It just really gets into this. So, dinner conversations with his wife now are talking about all of these different events around January 6th. And, obviously life sometimes sort of gets in the way. So he'll be able to do more of this on some days than others. Sometimes he's busy with work. Sometimes he's busy with family, but he's really been archiving as much of this as he can. And in one instance, found himself going down this rabbit hole, identifying someone who assaulted an officer that day, and using facial recognition software, ended up generating a lot of leads to pornographic websites. And before he knew it, he was looking through a lot of gay porn to find ultimately a man who assaulted officers. And they've since sent that into the FBI, and you'll probably be hearing about that potentially, next year or whatever the FBI gets around to finally bringing that case home. But you really just, brought it beyond any reasonable doubt. And with, able to match up some of these things that you knew about that individual with things that you could find out about them online. Freckles play a big role here, tattoos, all sorts of things that can be that little confirming piece of information. Often it's just who people were with. If you find one person, there's no guarantee, even with a facial recognition match, perhaps, that this is that person. So how do you get that confirming factor? If they were with someone and you see them together at the Capitol on one day and then separately outside of that together at another point, you're good to go, right? Because that's double confirmation. If you have two people who look similar and you find them in separate environments, then you've identified them.
And these are all amateur sleuths. I mean, what I thought was interesting is that as you're right, they use their own vetting process before they turn things over to the FBI. You interviewed one individual who, you're right. They want to make sure that they're dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's to make sure that they are correct identifications. So, I mean, these people developed their own their own protocols for how to go on, because obviously, you don't want to go into the FBI with something half-baked, something you don't actually understand. So is there a network? Were they working together? Were they screen sharing? Was this a group thing? How does it actually work?
Yeah, a lot of it takes place in group chats. And I think, frankly, that's one of their sort of secret weapons, just that they can use some of these collaborative tools that are really available to everyone, whereas that's a little more complicated for the FBI, where you're talking about all these field offices where email is the primary source of communication between these different field offices. Whereas, they're just in these group chats chatting, and they can organize them by hashtag, and they can organize them by various subjects. So, everyone gets sort of a nickname or a hashtag, and everything that's found about them is dumped into one of these chats. It keeps it well organized. Okay, now this report's been sent in. We're good to go there. They all sort of collaborate really well together. But, they really are batting 1,000 here. I think it's that peer review process that really helps out, because you can sort of challenge the evidence that other people discover, make sure that's true, and sort of really thoroughly vet it, question it, sort of like an editing process almost within the sleuth community. And because there's so much sort of trust built up there, it becomes this really valuable tool. Whereas, the FBI, frankly, they raided someone who wasn't the right person they were looking for. There was a woman who was raided in Alaska, who had her door knocked down because they thought that she was involved in stealing Pelosi's laptop. And after that went through, after that happened, and this news story sort of blew up because the FBI raided the wrong woman who did not enter the Capitol. The sleuths ended up working on the woman that the FBI was actually looking for here and identified her lickety split within 30 minutes. And now actually she's being sentenced this afternoon. Her nickname was Airhead Lady, along with her son. And they were in Pelosi's office and aided with the theft of
How'd she get the name
Pelosi's
Airhead
laptop.
Lady? How did she earn the name Airhead Lady?
It's a good nickname, and she earned it because she actually, it's not just sort of a joke, although that's the underlying part of it, but they stole these, you see these photos of the individuals on the floor of the House, lawmakers who put these emergency hoods over their head, these clear emergency hoods, sort of an airbag, right? So they stole those and actually walked out of the Capitol with those on their head.
Brilliant.
Emergency. Yeah. And that's how they got the nickname.
So, I mean, it's going back to this diverse group of, anonymous Americans, been working to do all this, the range of skill sets that you describe. So, in case you think that your 20-something-year-old daughter is wasting their time on dating apps. In fact, one of these 20-something-year-olds entrapped insurrectionist on a dating app. There's the mom who you describe as her Facebook stalking skills in pursuit of justice. So, we might think that, people are wasting their time on all of this, but they become these valuable, tools here. So let's just talk about January 6th and the way it's understood, because, there are now millions of Americans that think that it's overblown. They believe either the revisionist history or they've just decided it was just another protest. You explain that January 6th was a pivot point for American democracy, but it was also a pivot point for, this is what you wrote, it was also a pivot point for the FBI and law enforcement, which were caught flat-footed despite all the warning signs flashing online ahead of the Capitol attack, and who were left playing catch-up with open-source researchers moving at internet speed. So again, going back to this is another one of the astonishing aspects of January 6th. How could they have been caught so flat-footed? I mean, this is one of those moments where we have an assumption of our ability to anticipate and monitor something major. This was a huge intelligence failure. You've looked at this. What happened? What broke down? Were we just never set up to do something like this? Did we never anticipate that something like this would happen? Was it a policy failure, a structure failure, a failure of individuals? What's your read?
I think sort of all of the above, but one of the themes, there's one example that I hope this is just a sort of bureaucratic thing that's sort of a head smacker. There was this contract that was set to expire involving Data Miner, this tool that the FBI had been using for years to sort of alert them of really bad rhetoric, what was bubbling online. It's actually a tool that a lot of newsrooms use as well to sort of alert them of what's getting a lot of traction. It's built a lot off of Twitter, but it uses some other websites as well. That contract, a year before January 6th, think December of 2019, comes up for renewal. They open it up this process. Data Miner gets underbid by another company called ZeroFox. So when does that contract expire? New Year's Eve of 2020, just as when the clock hit midnight, and we got into 2021. They no longer had access to that tool, and all of the other FBI sort of components that were built off of that underlying structure of Data Miner went offline, went kaput. So you see these emergency emails circulating because this was sort of something that they got blindsided by. The new company did not set them up with logins and did not sort of have a layover essentially to make sure this transition was smooth. The best that they could really hope for, even though they started paying for this tool on January 1st, was they were told, we'll definitely get them before inauguration. Hopefully we can get them on the 6th for you guys. But, just look at that, right? You're talking about the last 2 weeks of December of 2020, which is a time where there's a lot of other events going on. We sort of overlook it now, but there is this massive data breach, one of the biggest data breaches in American history. There's also a bomb that went off in Nashville that didn't kill anyone, but that was something that the FBI surged a lot of resources to. Everyone went in. That was just at the end of a hell of a year. And frankly, government, et cetera, this would apply to journalists as well. Nobody's really firing on all cylinders, right, during those final weeks of December, and sort of phone it in.
In retrospect, I think that's true, yeah.
So just a vacation. Yeah, it was a part of this.
Well, you also, talk about the technological capabilities of the FBI. After September 11th, when the FBI realized that their technology was outdated, that it was the high-tech equivalent of the Stone Age. I think that's your description. And in 2012, the FBI deploys this new computer system. But you write that while nearly every field office in the country was involved in the January 6th investigation, the FBI was drowning. And the Bureau was also impacted by the sizable percentage of agents sympathetic to the rioters. Okay, so we're talking about now post this. So they're drowning in data. But how significant was that a problem, that in law enforcement there were sympathizers for what happened on January 6th, which is really disturbing going forward.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think there are degrees of this, right? There are FBI agents who aren't just necessarily gung-ho Trump guys, but who also don't think that these cases should be a priority just because, they're not used to working, say, misdemeanors. That's not typically something that the FBI does a lot of, is work misdemeanor cases. And there was that sort of belief about this within the Bureau, that they'd much rather be working what one official called sexier cases, right? Sort of whether that's international terrorism or sort of these harder gang cases. But really, a lot of this is because it's sort of coming down from the sluice now. The FBI agents are really just sort of there to check a box and to sort of vet that information. It's not, I set that aside in terms of the seditious conspiracy cases. The FBI did a lot of really thorough work on those, but some of these sort of more run-of-the-mill ones, they're just sort of handed to them on a silver platter, and it's not something that maybe gets your blood going. But there certainly is a lot of Trump sympathy within the Bureau, and I think it's tough to to think about that in the current political environment, because we've had, I don't know how long, 6, 7 years now, 8 years now of Donald Trump saying that the FBI is out to get him. It's part of the deep state. But just fundamentally, if you look at, the inputs to the FBI, it's more conservative leaning. It's a law enforcement organization. Military veterans have priority there. You enter the FBI a little bit later if you're a military veteran than you otherwise could have. So that's when you're talking about the inputs there, and you look at who is within the FBI, it really is kind of more of a conservative leaning organization. And I think that's played out. And we've seen some of that bubble up into public, where you now have these quote unquote whistleblowers who have testified before the House about what their beliefs are about the January 6 cases, who've written books and have podcasts that are centered upon them being whistleblowers, quote unquote, about what was happening inside the FBI after January 6th.
So going ahead, how this has changed everything, one of the sleuths told you that the FBI computer system is fucking stupid. Others said they needed to make sure the reports they sent to the FBI did not surpass the FBI's file size limit. So you point out one of the great innovations from this open source intelligent from the sleuths is the FBI didn't have to put all of their faith in them. The Bureau could simply vet the information themselves or verify through cell phones that the suspects were actually in the Capitol. So by early this year, the FBI was deeply indebted to these sleuths. So going forward, is this going to be a continuing relationship? Is this like a new era of monitoring law enforcement? I mean, is this has these moms at their kitchen tables now, have they changed the way the FBI is going to do its work? That's what I'm getting at.
I think hopefully would be the hope there, because the FBI has to change how it's doing its work just altogether, frankly, right? This is just really outdated. One of the things that I learned that just sort of smacked me in the face, I've been covering, I graduated, in 2009, right? So I've been covering and I've covered DOJ and the FBI ever since. So, 14 years now, right? And when I was first starting out, and up until a few years ago, when I emailed the FBI, there was it was typically the format was a name at ic.fbi.gov. And I never really knew what that stood for. I guess I probably thought maybe like intelligence community, some other acronym along those lines.
That's what I would have given.
And working on this book, I came to learn that it actually stood for Internet Cafe, as in, from the days of dial-up and AOL, because it was created at a time when you actually had to physically go to a separate room because their system wasn't hooked up to just the internet in general. So you had to go to this internet cafe within your FBI field office to check into your electronic mail. And I think that's really sort of what we're dealing with here. It's just when you have these massive contracts and just, to fix these systems, it just really just becomes bogged down in the bureaucracy, and they're just not as nimble as a lot of these outside groups can be. There also is, the First Amendment concerns are real here. And, I think that's going to be sort of a challenge going forward, because the FBI just shouldn't be collecting mass information on just protests, right? They shouldn't be doing a lot of the stuff that outsiders can, but that's really what's broken some of these cases open for the sleuths is they just, they do some sort of search, and then, okay, we're going to document everyone who was at this protest. And then if you see them at the Capitol and then you see them at a protest, in the state capitol in their home state, then you already know, okay, this person is from Michigan. Who else can I connect them to? And that becomes a really quick lead. So a lot of this, stuff is stuff that the FBI shouldn't be keeping on their internal systems, but they could be looking out there on the World Wide Web. And the Boston Marathon bombing is one that really, I think, that could have been a lesson for the FBI, because they were just flooded with all of this information. And ultimately, this is sort of a bad example of how this sleuthing can go bad, because you had people on Reddit who were falsely accusing innocent people of doing the wrong thing.
There's a real danger
ultimately,
there, right? I mean,
it is. Yeah. And that ultimately is what spurred the FBI to put out photos of the actual suspects, because they didn't want innocent people getting in the line of fire, so to speak. So, and that was what spurred. And then because they put those photos out, they actually got a tip from a family member. That's what led to the identification. But there could have been some lessons learned, and that was 10 years ago now, from that instance where they needed a better way of collecting all these digital materials, not just leaving them sitting, in an FBI inbox somewhere, in some server somewhere. Actually make them more accessible, more readily accessible and searchable for the FBI, because they really took the approach to this case that it was all about documents, and that's the multi-million-dollar contract that they handed out was for this product that could really well organize PDFs. And that's just not what January 6th was about. Give me the video. That's all the sleuths want. Every video you could possibly see, because that's what really can break these cases open.